Welcome to Laptop Radio. Today's show is the Democratization of Startup Success Beyond Silicon Valley, and we have Jeff Ransdell with us. He is the founding partner and managing director of Field Venture Capital. Hello, Jeff.
How are you, Michelle?
I am good. Where are you located now?
I am in sunny Miami, Florida right now.
Lucky you. I mean, California is not bad this week, though.
California is not bad, but Miami's a special place, I think anyway.
So tell us about yourself.
I actually started off my career as very young. I started my first business when I was 14, and
Wow.
by the time I was 24, I had built 4 companies and sold them all off.
Wow.
And sometimes I think life is about being at the right place at the right time. And I met a gentleman who actually happened to be very big person inside Merrill Lynch.
Mhm.
And, that I'm aging myself here a little bit, but that goes back to mid 90s when the dot-com, bubble was being blown up, if you will.
Mhm.
And I would say we were like maybe halfway up the mountain of the dot-com pinnacle. And I was hired to be a junior analyst during that time, really focusing on tech startups and whatnot, and trying to help analysts really look at these companies through a different set of eyeglasses. Because, your traditional financial advisors and analysts really looked at companies through the lens of fundamentals and technical analysis, and all of a sudden they're looking at these tech companies that don't have any revenue, and it was really an issue. But that was the beginning of a 21-year career, and I did a lot of different things. I managed some portfolios for some global family offices and did some strategy work for the organization, and then ultimately the job that I retired from in 2016, I was one of 6 people that ran the organization worldwide, and my P&L responsibilities were the state of Florida, state of Alabama, state of Georgia, all of Latin America, and the Caribbean. And a lot of people say to me, well, why in the world would you leave a great job like that? And the driving force behind me leaving was that I wanted to build a venture capital firm that was really bringing the plan, the process, and the disciplines that I had learned in the capital markets on Wall Street into the private sector of venture capital, and try and fix some of the things that I felt needed to be fixed in the asset class, and provide access to more investors, because I think the creative economy is definitely something that needs to be in everybody's portfolio mix. And unfortunately, your average investor just doesn't have access to these things, right? You need to know someone who knows someone who knows you, who knows me. And I would like to change that a little bit. I'd like to make it a little bit more accessible.
Awesome. So the topic is the democratization of startup success. And I wanted to emphasize success because we'll talk about that later. But how are you utilizing Field Venture Capital for the democratization of startup success? And what is that? What does that mean?
Well, democratization, can be in a lot of different forms, right? You are at Stanford, so you're on the West Coast. And that's the motherland of, if you will, of venture capital and startup companies. And I think that what has happened over the last 3 years, it's really gotten significant, and that is, let's say, the democratization of information because of technology, right? Information just flows so much easier than it ever has before. Whatever happens, Sunday night in China is going to affect our markets Monday morning, whether we like it or we don't. We know things now today so easily that we didn't even know 3 years ago. And what that has done, I believe, for startup companies and for entrepreneurs, is they realize that they can utilize technology, and they don't necessarily have to journey to Silicon Valley anymore to be successful, to start up a company. They can stay in Kansas City, Kansas, or Austin, Texas, or Miami, Florida, or Bogota, Colombia. We're very focused on Latin America, and you can do that. I mean, I think that for us, the democratization of all of this is just that these startup companies and these entrepreneurs need support. So they need capital, which we like to say is fuel, right? We fuel these companies. They need access to things above and beyond capital, things like leadership development. How do you get ready to be a public person running a public company? Very different than running a private company, by the way. And how do we make sure that they get there? How do we teach financial acumen? There's a lot of things that go above and beyond just the capital. And that's what we try to do. And we've created an ecosystem in Miami, Florida to do just that.
Awesome. What is your the VC firm's thesis and investors like?
So our thesis is what we like to call exponentiality. So if you think about an Airbnb, for example, how is it that a company that really doesn't own any brick and mortar, It's just a software package that is connecting end users who want to rent really nice homes and condos around the world to people who own those condos and want to rent them out and make some extra money, right?
Mhm.
How is it that in 6 years, an Airbnb can get to $1 billion valuation when it took Hyatt 60 years to get to?
Mhm.
That's what we refer to as exponential growth. And
Okay.
so what we do is we took a bunch of companies like that, Uber and a whole bunch of others, and we broke them down into the elements of the companies, looking for commonalities. And those commonalities we put onto a canvas, which we call an exponential canvas.
Mhm.
And so what we do is we literally scour the earth looking for founders that are leveraging what appears to be exponential technologies. We put it to the test, and
Mhm.
if it's there, we invest in it. And that's our thesis.
Awesome.
Our limited partners are, I think, a little bit different than they are in the Valley. The commonalities would probably be, family offices, but our family offices tend to be global because we live in Miami and it's truly an international city. I mean, I tell people that Miami's not even a part of the United States, right? So it's a very unique city, and it has a lot of unique people that are from all over the world, and those individuals are LPs. We also have a lot of ultra high net worth individuals. Again, those individuals who were perhaps getting left behind. That I was
Mhm.
talking about earlier. The real reason why I started this firm. We have a lot of investors in Kansas City, Kansas. We have a lot of investors in what I like to say middle America who, for the first time in their lives, realize that, every single day when I wake up, I'm interacting with a technology, and I
Mhm.
interact with my brands and how I consume differently than I did even 3 years ago.
Mhm.
And as a result of that, I should probably be owning those companies. And how do I do that? Well, you're not going to be able to do that going to Merrill Lynch or Morgan Stanley or UBS or anyone else on Wall Street. You have to, again, know someone who knows someone who knows you, who knows me.
Mhm.
And so our LPs are family offices globally, ultra high net worth individuals globally, and also institutions that serve them. So registered investment advisors
Mhm.
who are serving clients and wanting to add the creative economy as an asset class to the portfolio construction.
Awesome. And what is your funding cycle? Is that similar to a VC firm in Silicon Valley, or is it different? When you're funding startups, how is that process like? Is it similar to something that we'll see in a VC firm in Silicon Valley, or is it different? I'm just mainly the whole investment process.
I think that the investment process is I think it's pretty similar. I mean, we have some venture capital firms in Silicon Valley that we do syndicate work with, and the process is really pretty much the same. We identify these opportunities, we do the due diligence, we
Mhm.
run that company through a number of different filters, trying to figure out, does it make sense for us to invest our capital?
Mhm.
The one thing that we do that might be a little bit different, and I think that it is, because we come from the public markets, really the senior executives of our firm.
Mhm.
In the public markets, it's one of the most scrutinized businesses in the United States. I mean, I actually was a part of everything that took place during the financial crisis in 2009, was a part of the financial reform in 2009.
Yeah.
And, and so one of the things that we do is really focus on risk mitigation. And
Yeah.
when we write our first check,
Mhm.
it's disciplined as far as the bands, like depending, like if it's a Series A round, for example, we'll invest between 2 million and 4 million.
Mhm.
And that first check, then what we do is we let the founder understand that, look, we are going to reserve for you another $6 million.
Mhm.
And the only way that you can unlock that funding is by meeting or exceeding the KPIs that we develop for you. And so our founders on a monthly basis go into a portal and they populate their numbers against these KPIs, and that becomes our KPI dashboard. And
Awesome.
then if the company's performing, there's more cash that's more capital that's invested in them. And if they're not, we get into the sandbox with them, try to figure out what we need to do to help them get
Mhm.
back on track. It's really our foundation of mitigating risk.
Yeah, that's really cool. I was doing a lot of SEC compliance for siblings athletes. I've seen bad founders with public company, and it really affects the shares
Yeah, for sure.
for sure.
So,
Yeah.
so we're very thoughtful about that. If you think about the asset class of venture capital, 80 to 90% of a lot of venture capital funds will go in the loss bucket.
Hmm.
And, it turns out to be 10 or 20% of the companies that actually perform.
Hmm.
What we're trying to do is put that on its back. What we're saying is we're holding ourselves to a model of having 20% losses
Mm-hmm.
and 80% successes. And so we believe that we can do that. So far, knock on wood, we're 3.5 years into this, and
Mm-hmm.
we are proof sourcing exactly to that, but more time will tell.
Awesome. Awesome. How do you work with the companies in which you invest?
Yeah, that's really important. I like to tell people that the venture capital asset class is not something that you can be passive in, right? You have to be very involved. We believe in what we call co-building companies. And it's actually a discussion, very deep discussion that we have with the founders before we commit to investing in the company, that they understand that there's nothing about us that's passive, and that if they accept our check, that they're basically putting us in the C-suite as a co-builder, right? And so we're very, very involved. As I said, we're populating KPIs and having KPIs on a monthly basis. I like to say that on a yearly basis, Michelle, you more than likely go to the hospital once or go to the doctor once a year and you get a physical. And the reason that you're doing that is you're trying to be proactive, right? And you're trying to say, look, if there's a problem, I want to catch it early so that the problem doesn't become life-threatening.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
believe, at Fuel Venture Capital, the same philosophy should go in how we're managing our portfolio companies. And that's why we do it on a monthly basis. If there's a problem, we want to identify it quickly. We want to get in that sandbox. We want to try to figure out what that bumper and barrier that is in front of us is and get it removed so that it doesn't become life-threatening.
Yeah.
We're very involved with our portfolio companies. We sit on all of their boards, and because we do so many different things, I mean, we're extremely involved in really almost every decision that takes place.
Yeah, that's probably a good thing. I mean, it'll be a good training for them once they become public. They would have to do that with the SEC. Anyways, not monthly, but I think they have to start the process of all the disclosures.
Yeah, see, and I love that. And that's actually because I come from the public markets.
Yeah.
In my former life, I was very involved in leadership development. In fact, I ran leadership development for the organization for a while. And so that's a big part of my toolkit, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm trying to develop our founders and get them ready to wear the suit that they're eventually going to have to fit into.
Mm-hmm.
And we spend a lot of time on that, right? And because it is very different. And I think in the last couple of years, we've seen some examples of where that has gone terribly wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You think about like WeWorks, for example, or even Uber, right? I mean, you can say whatever you want to say about Travis Kalanick. I actually think that he's a brilliant, very brilliant human being. And but he became very successful very quickly. And maybe he didn't have the right ambassadors around him to just help him with a few things that ended up tripping him up.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I'm very sensitive about that. I used to write the 14A and I filed the do 4-5. I work with the CFO on the Ks and the Qs. So misrepresentation is a big thing. I mean, not only that, conflict of interest, being accountable, right, and offering transparency. So I advise a few companies, and when I see hints of that, I just back off, because if you can't be honest about your startup, like, we expect you to be even more honest later on, right?
Yeah.
And which goes into, what do you look for in founders? What kind of founders align with this democratization?
Just like in anything in life, the wonderful thing about life is there's so many different characters that walk around on a daily basis. But I do think that there's commonalities between identifying people who have track records of success. I mean, being successful doesn't happen by accident. You have to work very hard to get where you are. I think a lot of people look at professional athletes on a daily basis through the television screen, and they think, oh, they have this great life, but they don't realize the amount of hard work that went into getting there and the amount of sacrifice that went to getting into there. And I think that the same thing rolls into corporate athletes, and that's what I like to refer to it. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking for corporate athletes. I'm looking for really smart people who have the ability to get on their horse and ride out into the future. Mm-hmm. And come back and build companies for that future. I'm looking for people who are humble and that are coachable. Mm-hmm. I think that arrogance can kill and sink any ship. And if somebody's coachable, I can actually coach that into humility. But if they're not coachable, I can't. Mm-hmm. And therefore, it doesn't matter how successful of a company it could be. It probably doesn't belong in our portfolio, just because our core values don't align. And I think that would be the other thing that I would say. It's important to understand, and we spend a lot of time with our founders before we make a decision to invest, and And it's really around who is this human being? And who is this human being when he or she doesn't know people are watching? So it's who do you know, right? That can kind of tell me who you really are, Michelle, when you're not on your podcast. You can learn a lot from. And a track record of success. I mean, people who are successful for a reason, and everything that they've done in their life is successful. Some people say to me, well, how do you find a track record of success with a 24-year-old startup person who just graduated from Stanford? And I can say, well, track record of success is that person had to do something right to get to Stanford in the first place. That is an element of success. And what did they do when they were there, right? Did they just study, or did they manage different jobs? Were they juggling different things? It all matters, and it's all an element that comes into a track record of success.
Well, I wanted to ask you about judgment of people, because I remember when I took startup law in law school, my startup professor basically said that the judgment of people is one of the most important one for startup and startup success, because as an investor, you need to look at people, and as a founder, you need to hire people, the best person. There are people who know their metrics really well, have clarity in their business, they know how to gain traction, right? And there's also people who just basically say stuff and manipulate and make up stories. In your opinion, how do you know what is real and what is not? And I think there's more of those in the age of fake news and fake everything.
Yeah, and Michelle, I actually like how you articulated that. When I was in the public sector, I really, the majority of the people that I faced off with were very, very obviously successful people. And I didn't really run into a lot of these elements that you're talking about. But when I came into the private sector, I think if I'm pointing inward, one of the biggest things that I had to learn quickly was, oh my gosh, there are a lot of people that are just saying things, and it's all to house of cards, and there's really nothing behind it. And so to be concise with the question that you asked me, that has been a learning experience for me, I'm not going to lie. And luckily for me, that the people surrounding me, my chief investment officer, her name is Maggie Bowe. She's a former hedge fund manager, long short hedge fund manager, just a brilliant, brilliant person. And her investment team really helps me with that, right? Because you can say whatever you want to say, but at the end of the day, the numbers either support it or they don't. And if we get underneath the hood and that engine doesn't look anything like we were made to believe it is supposed to look, we will walk away from the table. Because it's just, again, it goes back to, for us, it's about aligned core values. And it's hard for us, it's hard for me as a human being, because my core values don't allow me to be that way with anybody. I'm not going to try and make you believe that I'm doing something or I am something that I'm not. And therefore, the weakness for me, because I'm not willing to portray it or push it into the world, I don't expect it's going to come back to me. And that's one of my weaknesses. So I think we have to be very careful about it. But to answer the question, I have really, really smart people around me, and I know what my weaknesses are. They know what my weaknesses are, and they help me with that.
Awesome. Yeah, I've experienced a lot of that too. I've met people who fabricate their numbers to investors, and that's why I asked you. And I came from a very protected, sheltered place. I used to be a corporate attorney at a payments company, and I appreciate, of course, HR, because most of the people that I work with are cool. What kind of stories are you looking for in startups? What kind of hunger for the projects that really interests you?
I like that question too, because I like to call that the wow factor. And so if you meet with a founder, and again, if you ask somebody to tell you what's the most difficult thing you've ever done in your life, and they can't actually impress upon you that they've really had any challenges in their life, or if you ask somebody what's the one thing you're most proud of, and they can't really talk to you in a deep way about that, those are all telltale signs. I'm looking for founders who are extremely passionate about what they're doing and can get me excited, right? If I go into a room and the founders just, I'm just going to, say a scoop of chocolate and a scoop of vanilla, and I'm just sitting there hardly being able to get through the meeting, and I'm looking for a cup of coffee, that to me is a telltale. This probably isn't the passion that I'm looking for. I'm a very passionate person myself. And it's helped me get where I'm at. And, again, there's a million different people that walk the face of the earth. We're all different. There's nothing wrong with any of that. But from an investability perspective, I'm looking for people who have high levels of energy, high levels of humility, and an extreme work ethic. I think that for Jeff Ransdell, the number one thing I'm looking for is, are you willing to work harder than everybody else to make this dream that you're telling me is so important to you come true?
Besides looking for a founder who plays 24/7 every day, and I know people who do work 23 out of 24 hours, and that's normal. What kind of magic do they have besides that? What is the secret sauce? There has to be that. I hear that from interviewing Soundtrack, your brand. I know that there's something within them that you truly believe in that is really different from the individuals that you did not invest in. What is that?
I think the answer to that question, Michelle, is you don't know what it is, but it's a feeling that you get. And you know what I mean because you've interviewed Olisar. You can't put your finger on it. It's hard. I mean, if you sat down with a piece of paper and you and I went back and forth on characteristics and things like that, we could probably figure it out. But the fact of the matter is there's just some things in life that are about energy. And
Yeah.
you can't necessarily see it, you can't necessarily speak it, but you feel it and you know it, and it's a gut thing, right? And so I think that that's the best way to say it. I mean, we could say if the person, male or female, walks in the room and they're 6 feet tall, that's the people that you invest in. But that's not it, right? There's something just about some people and their ability to see things that we can't see, their ability to articulate it and make you feel inside like you're a part of it, and the fear of missing out. If I'm not involved with this, if I'm not aligned with this person, I'm going to regret it for the rest of my life. And I think that that's really that element you're asking me about, which just is undefinable.
Yeah, I think it's insane. I love those technologies, so I understand that. I wanted to talk about money now because I believe that money is really important. Before we get into the specifics of money, I wanted to ask you about what is your favorite startup business models?
My favorite startup business models are B2B SaaS.
Okay.
Yeah. I like B2B. Well, I think that the B2B customer is a better customer from a business perspective than the consumer. I say that because it's less finicky. It's a more stable customer, right? Even through COVID, right? Mm-hmm. A company might have so many more things to worry about than perhaps a $50 subscription, right? But at the same time, what I do tell my founders is you have to make sure that you're important, right? If you're just a nice, kind of a toy or a nicety, it's very easy to cut that out of the run rate. Mm-hmm. But if you're a necessity, if you really are creating value for the organization, it's the last thing in the world that they're going to get rid of. And I think that is important. I love business to business.
Awesome.
Yeah. Business to business and SaaS. Reoccurring revenue is nothing better than that.
Mm-hmm. And I think there is a value in valuation. When you're looking at startup valuation, how is it different from Silicon Valley? Sometimes the valuations might differ by industry and region. And sometimes they're in line with similar industry, city, and region, right? So when we're talking about democratizing startup success from Silicon Valley to beyond, how do you look at startup valuation?
So I think that in most economic models, it boils down to supply and demand. Mm-hmm. And so in Silicon Valley, the demand for the companies, as I said earlier in this discussion, Silicon Valley is the motherland, right? Mm-hmm. And as a result of that, there's still a perception that the very best new creative companies that are disrupting verticals are coming out of there. That is factually changing, right? Mm-hmm. Especially right now. And so if you are starting an incredible company in Miami, Florida, and your valuation is not probably going to be as high as it would be if you were in Silicon Valley. And again, it's just supply and demand. The majority of your big venture capital firms are in the Valley, mm-hmm. and they battle it out. That's why I didn't want to go there, right? I wanted to go where I thought the puck was heading, and I will give Silicon Valley the credit that's credit's deserving. Miami will probably never be what Silicon Valley is, but it can become a very significant microcosm of it. And again, those companies that we're investing in Miami, Florida, or Latin America, or Europe, or Israel, or Austin, Texas, Denver, or Kansas City, are going to have a lower valuation because of the supply and demand factors.
Sometimes in the deck, each startups have their financial projection. As someone who has worked on these more professionally, sometimes it's easy to tell whether these financial projections are realistic or not. In your opinion, when you look at financial projections, what are you expecting to see?
Well, obviously, I think in this particular investment vertical, it's extremely important to see growth.
Mhm.
But I think now we are in a time where we've kind of gone through the life cycle of growth at all costs. I mean, I think that I don't even want to mention companies because it's not necessary. But we all know that in the last couple of years, we've seen some companies that were very hyped up, very well known, growing very fast,
Mhm.
but when it came time to face off with the public markets, just like you just said, those projections were questioned. And those companies may not ever be the same because of it. And I think that founders have learned that. It's been a good lesson to be learned, and that if we're going to go that route, then we have to make sure that what is under the hood is as solid as that we say that it is. And we understand as founders and operators of that business what the end consumer or the end investor in the public market is expecting from us.
Mhm.
And so I think all of that has changed, and it's changed to the positive, because ultimately at the end of the day, again, this is my humble opinion, but at the end of the day, like my firm's mantra is we are investor focused and we're founder driven,
Mhm.
right? And it starts with the investor, because without the investor, people like myself don't have the capital to inject into these companies. And so there is no startup ecosystem without the investor.
Mhm.
So to me, it only makes sense to put the investor's interest before everybody else's.
Mhm.
And if we can do that by mitigating risk and being transparent, you've said that a few times now, and I like that,
Mhm.
because that's the way it should be. There are three things that people hold closest to their heart. One is their health.
Mhm.
One is their family, which I like to link with their faith. And one is their money.
Mhm.
And you don't mess around with any of that. And if you are given the ability to be responsible for one of those things, it's a big responsibility. It demands a tremendous amount of servant leadership. And I think that's really where we are right now. So growth is super important. We're looking at that, but it's managed, and it's a responsible growth, that we are really truly running a company, and that our objective is to be close to profitability. And if we wanted to turn the trigger and go to profitability, we could at any time, because it's a balance of the two.
Yep.
And that's really what we're trying to lead and coach and impress upon our founders, that it's responsible growth. But we do have to grow. I mean, if we're not growing, there's no reason for anyone to be investing in us.
I love that. And I think as a founder, we need to grow all the time.
Yes.
Because you're constantly learning. What kind of revenue growth, sales funnel KPI constitutes success in the word startup success? How do you define success?
Well, I think once you've identified your product market fit,
Mm-hmm.
you've kind of perfected the end consumer tech stack. You've iterated, you've done some experimenting with the end consumer, and you've really understood what the end consumer is wanting from you. Once you've gotten to that point, then it's time to throw the hammer down. And what we really want to see is a triple double. I mean, in that first year that's coming out of, I know who I am now, and I know who my end consumer is, and I know what my end consumer wants from me, then we should be able to really strive, ambition of tripling that year.
Mm-hmm.
The next year, we should be able to do the same. And the year after that, things are getting more difficult now. The low-lying fruit is gone. We are having to do more iteration. We're having to do more experimentation.
Mm-hmm.
But we still think that a double is doable. And again, do you have to triple? Do you have to triple? Do you have to double? That's the ambition. But at the same time, it's about, again, as I said, balancing that, because that's serious growth.
Mm-hmm.
And doing that responsibly. And sometimes it's a fight against the other, and you have to figure out where that right balance is. And again, that gets back to the experimentation.
Awesome. And when I think about growth, I think about traction. When you said SaaS and recurrent transaction and business to business, I think sometimes founders need to balance between the product and growth to gain traction, to retain your customers, to grow your company so you get more customers, and to provide that value and valuation so that you can kind of grow.
Yeah, I like that. It's very well said.
Yeah. What is your return expectation?
When our investment committee gets to the last filter of our due diligence process, there's a question of what do we think that our return could be? and the due diligence should support it. And that number is a 10x.
Mhm.
So we make investment decisions with the belief system that based off of the fund, of the work that has been done, what we believe in these founders, what we believe we can impress upon the founders to create a alpha in what they're able to do, we believe it should be 10x.
Awesome. We spoke a little about risk. I think when you work at public companies, we're trained to be aware of a risk. In fact, we have to disclose that risk in our disclosure. And I think when you're managing your investors' money and evaluating startups, you need to consider those risks as well. What kind of risks do you think about? What keeps you up at night?
Yeah, I think that the risks in this space, there's a lot of them, and I don't sleep very well. But because risk can come out of anywhere, especially in this space, right? You're investing in companies and you're investing in founders that oftentimes are disrupting a vertical that has been in place for a very long time. And that vertical, the king of the hill, if you will, or the leader of that particular pack might have a lot of money on the balance sheet. And they just want to, smash you like a fly. That worries me and I've seen that. And it can happen just like that. And again, we're a startup, right? We don't have billions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars in our checking account, right? So getting into a lawsuit, which is going to be millions of dollars, can destroy a company as fast as you can say, this has been a horrible day. So that worries me. I also get concerned, and again, this is where you have to spend a lot of time making sure that you understand the person or the persons that you're investing and their stamina. This isn't easy. If it was easy, everybody would do it. It requires 14, 15, 16-hour days, 7 days a week. I mean, it's all hands on deck. And your support systems have to support that. So your family at home, the people who are depending on you need to understand that you're getting married again and you're marrying into a business. And that business or you're having another child, and that child is extremely dependent on everything that you do for it. And I get concerned sometimes that founders, it just isn't worth it. It's been 3 years. I could get a job, at a corporation that's going to pay me a couple $100,000 a year, have full benefits, and I only have to work 40 hours a week. So that's a little bit of my concern as well. And then the third thing I think is just we live at a very interesting time right now. I mean, you're out west. I don't know what it's really like, but from what I see on the television, it would seem that your homes are either getting knocked down because of earthquakes or they're getting burned down because of fires. You come to my side of the world and you got hurricanes every other week that are either blowing down homes or engulfing them in water.
Yeah, tornadoes.
And we're in the smack in the tornadoes in mid-country. And then to top it all off, we have a global pandemic and you can't go anywhere without a mask on, right? You have to have one of these things everywhere you go. And I mean, in Miami, it was really bad here. And I mean, it wasn't up until a week ago that we were even allowed to go inside of a building and have lunch, right? I don't know if you know what it's like in August in Miami, but it's like, if you can't go inside where there's air conditioning, you might as well just go sit in a sauna and try to have a burger. You can do it, but there's not a lot of fun. So we live in really interesting times, and I think that those times are going to continue to become more and more interesting. And I worry sometimes about how it all plays out. I don't like what I see on television where I just feel like our country is very divided. I don't like to see that.
Yeah.
I feel like there's these different cohorts of people instead of just coming together as one nation and one person and really trying to say, how do we get better as a society? I don't like how things feel right now, and that's just my personal opinion.
No, I agree with you. I think I've been coding every day just to focus on coding and don't have to focus on climate shifts, the divide, pandemic, and everything else, trade wars, you name it.
There's a lot for us to be worried about right now. There really is. And I think that's why there's a lot of angst right now.
Despite everything else though, the risk, the regulatory situation, technology, all the laws and regulations, the likelihood of failure, founders that could be really, really bad, and arrogant. What motivates you to invest in startup? I mean, you could have retired, you could have done anything else, right? But there is something there in the startup world that motivates you. What is that thing?
For me, and I learned this a long time ago, right? I think that the reason I was put on this earth is to release the human potential, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm really enjoy developing people. I did that in my corporate life,
Mm-hmm.
but here I really get to make a real difference. I mean, my efforts, my time, my energy, my mental capacity that I invest in these startups can really return to the overall society in a really big way. Not only me personally, not
Mm-hmm.
only my investors personally, but in society and people that I don't even know, because these creators are doing things that are just amazing, and it is improving, the world. And you talk about regulations, you talk about all that stuff, and again, it's one of those things I can get concerned about, right? I mean, and again, I don't mean this to be disrespectful at all. I don't. But when I turn on the television and I look at the age of our Senate, I look at the age of our Congress, and I look at the age of our presidents and the people who are asking us to vote upon, putting them in office, or they already all hold office. They're all an older, demographic.
Mm-hmm.
And I worry sometimes that they don't quite have the understanding that they should have to really understand what's going on. They're passing bills and whatnot, and they're not in the sandbox, or they don't have the exposure or the knowledge to really understand. And that could slow us down as a country.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I worry about that as well. I would really love to see some inspiration from somebody that would inspire someone like yourself, for example, to want to be a public servant, right? I mean, if we can get to that particular point where we have people like you that are representing the rest of us, then all of a sudden I think things start to move quicker and faster. Again, interesting times, but I do believe that things are going to go that way, right?
Yeah.
John Mayer once wrote a song that kind of lays that out very nicely, right? And that time's coming.
Even though we're investing in startups, we're also investing in the future of our planet and even beyond Earth, right? Because people are mining spaces now and there might be life forms. So who knows, right? But we're co-creating that future.
Yep.
And with that, let me ask you, what is your superpower? I think you mentioned that a little bit throughout the chat. What is your superpower, and what is your ideal future be like in, say, 10 years?
I think my superpower is just that. I do believe that I'm an outcome of servant leadership, right? I've had very strong men and women that have been ambassadors and coaches to me, and I've learned a lot. And I think that some of those things actually have been lost a little bit, and I want to try to instill that back into as many people as I possibly can. Those things I touch better than I found them. But at the same time, right, our biggest strengths are sometimes our biggest weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a tremendous amount of empathy and compassion for people.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned it earlier, right? You have to be careful, right? Because people will take advantage of that, because not everybody value systems are like yours. And so you have to be careful, and I have to be careful with those things. But that's my superpower. It's also my kryptonite. Where I am in 10 years, I think is I'm probably, if I'm being really transparent, I'm probably sitting on my boat in the Bahamas, and I'm having conversations with my team back in Miami. And I've already turned over the leadership of the firm to Maggie. That is my objective. I want Maggie to be the face and the leader of this organization. And she's leading a group of people who are making a real difference in our investors' lives. Mm-hmm. And the founders that we get to be on the journey with. That's what I hope to see. And that this fund turns into 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 other funds. And we have a really nice family of funds that adds up to probably $1 billion worth of AUM. And we have a very solid name in the industry as being people who do it right. And that's really what I want to do.
Awesome. Is there anything that you would like to share that I have not asked you yet?
I got to be honest with you, Michelle. I think you've done an incredible job of asking questions that nobody's ever asked me before. I really can't think of anything.
Awesome. What is that one advice that you would like to provide to the community?
I don't think it could go down into one thing. What I would say is that I think we all need to be a little bit less judgmental. Mm-hmm. We all need to be a little less quick to get on our iPhones and judge people without first spending some time to there's an old saying, seek to understand before being understood. And I think that we all need to seek to understand a lot more than we are. And I think that we need to try to understand one another's differences and be good listeners and try to find commonality, because if we don't lock arms,
Mhm.
then we're just a big divided, country. And this is an incredible country. People who come here from other countries, they thrive because that's what this country was built to do.
Mhm.
But if you're born here, sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And I think that we all just need to, it's interesting times, and I think we just all need to take a step back and remember that our neighbor is as important as anything else.
I'm becoming more grateful of everything, including the ability to step outside.
Because we were all locked up for a while, right? We don't know. It's just, we don't know. These are really super interesting times that none of us have seen before. If we have to fight a virus, let's fight it together. But if we're fighting each other, we're never going to figure it out.
Yeah, totally. I completely agree with you. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Michelle. I really appreciate it. Happy Friday to you. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. I hope you don't have any more earthquakes. I hope that the fires don't heat up so much where you feel like you're in Miami. If you do, you can come to Miami. We don't have fires. We have hurricanes, but we don't have fires. Plenty of water to put those fires out here.
Alrighty, bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Michelle.